For years, the story around Prince Harry has been told in fragments, interviews, headlines, carefully worded statements, and a lot of anonymous sources. But behind all that noise is a single question that's never really gone away. What happens when a modern royal family tries to protect its future? While two children grow up an ocean away from the institution they're supposedly connected to. Tonight we're looking at a set of claims and signals circulating around the palace, rumors of tightened succession expectations, whispers of intensified record reviews, and a growing sense that the monarchy is entering a new phase, smaller, stricter, and far less sentimental about who counts as inside. And if even half of what's being discussed is true, it doesn't just affect Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It changes the stakes for their children, and it forces Harry into the kind of decision he can't sidestep with distance, silence, or timing, because this time it isn't about public opinion, it's about eligibility, identity, and whether the crown is quietly drawing a line that can't be erased later. Now here's where this gets complicated fast. Reports and Royal Watch chatter suggest King Charles has allegedly given approval to the concept of tighter standards around succession eligibility. One of the most talked about ideas is a rule framed in blunt terms. If a child is to remain meaningfully connected to the line of succession, that child would need to be raised primarily in the United Kingdom, within the culture, customs, and day-to-day framework that shapes the working royal environment, not a summer visit, not a quick holiday appearance, not a photo op, full-time upbringing, ongoing oversight, a life that is unmistakably rooted in Britain. And if that sounds extreme, that's because the point, at least as it's being framed, isn't comfort, it's clarity. Because in the royal system, ambiguity is dangerous. Ambiguity creates loopholes, and loopholes create headlines that never end. The moment that idea entered the conversation, attention snapped to one family immediately, Harry and Meghan's children, Archie and Lilibet, raised in California largely away from public royal life, away from the institutional routines that shape royal identity, and away from the lived reality of a monarchy that functions as both family and state symbol. Whether you see that as healthy distance or a total disconnect depends on where you stand. But here's the hard truth. Royal systems don't run on what feels fair. They run on what stays stable. And that's why this alleged first rule hits deeper than titles. It's really about something more sensitive than rank. It's about belonging and who gets to decide it. Because if the institution is signaling that royal identity must be formed inside the UK, then the message is quietly brutal. The crown defines the requirements, not the individuals who marry into it, leave it, or challenge it. And that brings us to the next claim. One that raises the temperature even higher. A second, stricter standard has been circulating in the same conversations, that only children born to actively serving working royals would remain securely positioned in the succession framework. In plain language, if your parents aren't officially carrying royal duties, public engagements, ceremonial obligations, service under the crown, then the system no longer treats you as part of the forward-facing core. That matters because Harry and Meghan made their departure from working royal life in 2020. Whatever people call it, stepping back, breaking away, choosing independence, the fact remains they are not working royals in the traditional sense. So under that kind of model, their children would be placed in a different category entirely. And notice what's happening here. These aren't just personal consequences being discussed. These are structural incentives. It's the monarchy saying, in effect, if you want the privileges of the institution, you live within the institution's rules. If you leave, the system doesn't chase you. It reorganizes around you. That's the part many people miss. This isn't simply punishment. It's a strategy, a way to prevent the monarchy from being pulled into permanent negotiation with people who aren't committed to the same public role. And for King Charles, whose reign has been dogged by questions of modern relevance, continuity, and public trust, any move toward tightening the definition of core royal is easily framed as modernization, a leaner monarchy, fewer gray zones, less chaos. But here's the twist that keeps this from being a clean administrative story. The same chatter includes talk of something more methodical underway, something that feels less like PR and more like preparation, a deeper review, a more detailed verification process. It's being described in the language of bureaucracy, routine updates, record checks, paperwork clarification. But the details being whispered don't sound routine because the team reportedly linked to this review isn't being described as simple staffers running through forms. The profile being suggested includes constitutional minded experts, legal analysts, historians, and people who understand succession rules not as gossip but as frameworks tied to law, tradition, and legitimacy. And the focus, allegedly, is everything tied to Harry and Meghan's departure and their children's status, documentation timelines, eligibility assumptions, medical or procedural verification, norms, and the fine print that most of the public never sees. Let's be careful here. A review doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing. Institutions review records all the time, especially when public attention turns into long-term pressure. But the reason this becomes combustible is because of what it implies. It implies the palace wants certainty that can withstand scrutiny, and that raises a haunting question. What uncertainty is the palace trying to eliminate? Because when an institution starts preparing for clarity, it's often because it's anticipating conflict. And conflict is exactly where this story appears to be heading, because the other major piece of this puzzle is what Meghan Markle is reportedly doing in response. The talk is that Meghan is consulting legal counsel and exploring whether any succession-related shift, if formally enacted, would conflict with historic legal frameworks that govern royal inheritance. That includes the Act of Settlement of 1701, often cited as a cornerstone in the structure of succession rules, and the broader reality that major changes to succession typically aren't just family decisions. They can involve parliament, constitutional norms, and politically sensitive processes, depending on what is actually being altered. In other words, even if the palace wants reform, it can't always be done with a quiet memo. And that's why Meghan's reported posture is being described as confrontational, strategic, and deeply personal. Because to Meghan, the timing would feel like intent, not coincidence, not modernization, intent. A move that doesn't just tidy the institution, but redraws the boundary in a way that places her children outside it. If you've watched this saga closely, you know this is where the emotional fuse lives, the fear of erasure. Not just losing a place in a line on paper, but losing a claim to identity, an argument about whether her children will be treated as legitimate parts of the royal story, or permanently filed away as outsiders. And once that's the frame, everything becomes explosive. Because if Meghan pursues legal challenge, if any of this escalates into formal dispute, it becomes public by nature. Courtrooms don't deal in vibes, they deal in documents, statements, dates, records, and that's where the stakes change. From headline drama into something the palace dreads, exposure. If this becomes a legal battleground, it risks forcing both sides to put sensitive material on the record, material the monarchy traditionally protects at all costs. And right there, in the middle of that possible storm, is Prince Harry. This is where the story stops being a policy debate and becomes an intimate crisis. Because if Meghan fights, Harry can't remain neutral in any meaningful way. If he aligns fully with Meghan, he risks positioning himself against his family in a formal arena where there is no gentle retreat and no private reconciliation. If he aligns with the palace or even refuses to fight, he risks fracturing the family he's built and confirming every fear Meghan has ever voiced about the institution closing ranks. This isn't a public relations problem for him. It's an identity problem, a loyalty problem, a who am I now problem. And if you think that's dramatic, consider the next factor, Prince William. For years, William's public role has been careful, steady, measured, restrained. But the narrative around him is shifting into something sharper, the future king as institutional guardian. The idea being circulated is that William is no longer willing to tolerate anything that threatens long-term stability, whether that threat comes from scandal, media war, family fractures, or what many see as a cycle of repeated public airing of internal matters. In that framing, William isn't reacting emotionally, he's reacting structurally, he's the heir. Watching the institution absorb years of turbulence, watching headlines become normal, watching private conflict become content. And the portrayal now is of a man who believes the monarchy cannot move into the next reign, dragging unresolved disruption behind it. So the tone around William is tough calls, hard lines, and uncompromising stability. Even the most repeated summary idea is chilling in its simplicity. Better to lose a part than risk losing the whole. And whether you think that's responsible or cold depends again on where you stand. But it does one thing extremely well. It tells you the direction this institution might be leaning: less negotiation, more finality. And that brings us back to King Charles, because this isn't just about William's future. It's about Charles setting the tone now. If the monarchy is truly moving toward a smaller, more controlled model, it would make sense, at least internally, to reduce gray zones around who is in, who is out, and who can claim what. A monarchy built for longevity doesn't want loose threads. It wants definitions, and definitions come with consequences. Now here's the part that should make everyone slow down. Even if these rumored rules are being discussed, the most important question isn't whether they sound plausible, it's whether they can actually be formalized, and if so, how. Because the monarchy isn't only a family, it's an institution interwoven with law, tradition, and government. Some changes are internal, others are constitutional. And the moment succession is involved, you're no longer in the realm of simple family management. You're in the realm of national symbolism, legal continuity, and international interest, which is why the review angle matters so much. A serious institution doesn't step into potential constitutional controversy without knowing its own ground first, and that's why people are watching for signs, statements that become more precise, royal correspondence suddenly using more careful wording, palace language tightening, briefings becoming less emotional and more procedural. Because when the palace moves, it tends to move quietly until the moment it can't. And if Meghan is truly preparing to resist, and if Harry is truly being pushed toward a decision that will define his relationships permanently, then what we're looking at is not a temporary flare-up. It's a collision between two futures. One future where the monarchy draws a hard circle around its working core, ensuring continuity by narrowing the definition of belonging. Another future where Meghan fights for her children's inclusion as a matter of principle, identity, and legacy, arguing that distance from the UK does not equal disqualification from the royal narrative. And in the center of that collision is Harry, caught between the family he was born into and the family he chose to build. So here's the question that hangs over everything. What does Harry do when silence stops being an option? Because if legal action emerges, if palace reforms become formal, if record reviews become public conversation, then the private part of this saga ends. And once that door opens, it doesn't close neatly. Documents don't go back into shadows. Statements don't get unheard. Accusations don't vanish. If this escalates, it becomes a permanent chapter, one that future reigns inherit, whether they want to or not. Right now, it may look like a storm forming at a distance, but storms don't announce themselves with thunder first. They announce themselves with pressure, with tightening language, with careful positioning, with people preparing quietly long before the public realizes the ground is shifting. So if these reports, rumors, and signals are pointing in the same direction, then we may be watching the monarchy do what it has always done when challenged: protect the institution first, define the rules second, and force everyone else to decide where they stand, because what comes next won't be subtle, it won't be gentle, and it won't be easily undone. If this becomes a fight over succession, legitimacy, and identity, it won't just reshape one branch of the family. It will redefine how the modern monarchy draws its boundaries, who is inside them, who is outside them, and what price is paid by anyone who tries to live in between.